faces and new friends, and we will get this started. But just before we get started, I wanted to share something with you all on my screen. Can you see that photo of me with my? I wanted to show you that I am actually dressed for the meeting today, and that's not a ballet pose. I wore matching socks. So well, there you go. I would now like to introduce our panelists and ask them to actually take a moment to introduce themselves rather than me just reading off a piece of paper. So this morning we have David Anderson, who goes by Dave typically. We have David Howe, who goes by David typically, and we have Allison Howe. So why don't we start with Dave Anderson, if you could just briefly introduce yourself.
So I'm glad to be here this morning. I am currently the president and CEO of the Boys and Girls Club of Mercer County. I have almost 40 years of experience in nonprofits, the last 20 as executive director, CEO. Previously to being with the Boys and Girls Club of Mercer County, I was with Doylestown Hospital running their wellness center, and then YMCA's for 17 years, and also spent some time early in my career working with colleges.
Thank you, Dave. And now I'll do ladies first. Allison Howe.
Hi, I'm obviously Allison Howe. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm the executive director of an organization called VolunteerConnect, which is based in Princeton, New Jersey, and focuses on building nonprofit boards as well as nonprofit staff and trying to increase their capacity, nonprofits' capacity by doing that. My background is I have not quite the number of years as Dave, but getting close, so 25 years of nonprofit experience. I started out working for the Alzheimer's Association, and actually prior to that I was on the Alzheimer's Association board and got recruited to be their executive director. And then from there I worked for several years for Planned Parenthood, and then recently came to VolunteerConnect about a year ago, and I'm currently also serving on a small theater board near me, Actors Net of Bucks County.
Thank you, Allison. And it's no coincidence that Allison and David have the last name, and I'll let David Howe introduce himself to you.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks for having me, and I'm excited about the session that we're going to have today. I'm David Howe. I am the board chair of the Boys and Girls Club, so Dave and I work very closely together. We'll be able to talk about sort of our relationship and how we work together. I've been the board chair there for 3 years, and I will become the past chair in about a month. Been on the board for a bit over 6 years with the Boys and Girls Clubs, and it's been a terrific experience. I also am in the process of joining a second board for an organization also in Trenton, although that's not finalized yet. For my day job, I have recently taken early retirement from Merck Pharmaceuticals, where I spent 27 years in human resources, the last several at executive levels with the HR organization there. So I bring a big passion for the organizational aspects and how both for-profit and nonprofit organizations are run and leadership and so forth. I joined Beacon about a year ago, so I also am excited that the nonprofit subgroup is getting rekindled. That's one of the reasons that I joined Beacon, among many. But happy to be here and looking forward to getting to know many of you as we go forward.
Thank you, David. And we are going to be watching for questions from attendees in the chat box. If you have a question that occurs to you during the session, you can type it into the chat box, and Janine will be monitoring that. and we'll try to incorporate questions during and after as possible. So we will jump right in, and this question is posed to all of the panelists. What are the key responsibilities of board members in your organization? So this would pertain to Boys and Girls Clubs, of course. What are the responsibilities? What are the benefits that board members receive? And to the extent that it makes sense, please describe the mission and how board members help to carry that mission forward in terms of their giving of their time, talent, treasure, etc. And so why don't we start with Dave Anderson.
Thanks, Dory. So the mission of the Boys and Girls Club is to help youth, especially those who need us the most, to reach their full potential as productive, caring, and responsible citizens. For board members, what they get out of it, I tell every board member that we recruit that serving on a board is an adult program, meaning that you have to really enjoy what you're doing and get something out of it. As far as the roles and responsibilities, there's key roles and responsibilities that are the same no matter what board you serve on, but then depending on the type of organization and the size of the organization that you're serving on, those roles may be expanded upon or added to. So when I recruit a new board member, I talk about the fiduciary responsibility. I talk about strategic planning. I talk about their role of supervising the CEO, and also about policies and procedure development. So those are the core things that our board focuses on. And from the fiduciary responsibility, since we have to fundraise such a large percentage of our budget each year, there's a large fundraising component. You mentioned give, get, and earn. We do talk about that with every board member while we're in the recruiting process, specifically of how they could go about doing that. And we also find that every board member gets involved at different levels, depending on their availability of time to give, their resources to be able to give money or get money. And it's really that developing that personalized plan is what I spend a lot of my time with board members on. And that also dictates the personal program of what they want to do and how they want to get engaged. And if I can do that well, then they're going to be a long time and productive board member.
Terrific. David, how do you view that question?
Well, I recall my onboarding with Dave quite well, given that speech that he just gave. So I'm sure that he does go through that with every single board member. That all sounds exactly right to me. I would add a few things to that. So he's talked about sort of the core responsibilities. There are usually responsibilities, and there are with our board, to serve on committees. So you need to attend the regular meetings, but then also dive deep into something. For us, that could be the finance committee, it could be a governance or board development committee, it could be a fund development committee, and every so often we have ad hoc committees like a strategic planning committee or something like that. I think the board members also have a responsibility to attract others to the organization. So part of what we do as board members is identify other people who can either provide expertise for a project or some effort that we're trying to undertake, or potentially get involved as a volunteer or potentially another board member. I think we have responsibilities to ask questions as people who are not involved in the day-to-day running of the club. So as an example, one of our board members a year or two ago asked questions about cybersecurity. Might not have been something that the staff had at a high priority at that point in time, but it fostered a conversation. So we can bring an outside view and make sure that we're thinking carefully across the best interests of the club. So those are other responsibilities. Certainly as a board member, from a fiduciary point of view, we do all have responsibilities related to making sure that the club is operating effectively, is positioned for the future, is managing risks and things of that sort.
Great. Allison, from the perspective of someone who's works with volunteers and works with corporations who cultivate volunteers, share your thoughts.
Yes, well, I really appreciate what Dave said, that it really depends on the nonprofit. So the Boys and Girls Club is a pretty sophisticated, mature organization that has a lot of national support. But as many of you know, there's also a lot of local organizations that might need a different level of support from their board members. I mean, I think as far as the strategic responsibility that Dave and David just talked about, that is true for all board members. But sometimes you have organizations that are a little bit newer, that are recently founded, or smaller, that need a little bit more, or looking for a little bit more from board members to be more of what's termed a working board, where they're going to roll up their sleeves a little more and get involved. So that can range as far as responsibilities. From my board, I have a board member, for example, who helps with looking at our website and figuring out, is this the most effective way to convey what we're trying to convey? Or there might be, I actually was on a call last night with a very newly founded organization where the nonprofit board members are doing grant writing. So it does depend on the maturity of the organization and the size of it and what resources they have. So as you're thinking about what might be a good fit for you, certainly you want to ask questions and figure out what you're looking for, because there's something for everyone.
Yeah, true. And sort of a follow-on question, and Allison, you touched on it a little bit. Maybe Dave can speak to this. Often the lines can get a little muddy between the responsibilities of staff versus board members. And David spoke about the cybersecurity question that came up, which to me feels kind of like an oversight issue that the board can provide some guidance or insight on. But, I know of situations where in an environment, a board member may overstep into an area that may be more staff area of responsibility. Allison spoke to, it depends on the organization. Dave, from your perspective, from your organization, can you kind of share the differences between staff and board responsibilities a little bit more?
Sure. So for larger organizations, we look at how board wants to manage KPIs, or key performance indexes, for staff outputs. So if cybersecurity is one of the things we want to do, instead of board members coming in and trying to help actually implement something, we would then talk about strategy and say, well, what outcome do we want to get? And then let's then have staff come and put together a project plan on producing that outcome. And then the board's job is to monitor our progress towards that outcome. We may then ask our board for certain resources that we need, either funds that need to be raised or expertise, and then look at the board to bring some of those resources or connect us to some of that resource. But the actual doing then is a staff responsibility. But we do have some board members then that put on the other hat, and I think that was Allison was talking a little bit, that then become volunteers within the organization. And it's really good to have that clear, that if you are now as a board member going to volunteer to help with operational, mentor a youth, come in and help repair computers, that you now are being supervised by a staff person versus being a board member now.
So that's actually a great segue to another question on the list, which is how do volunteers differ from board members, and is volunteering a stepping stone to becoming a board member? Allison, maybe you can start us off on that question.
Yeah, well, I think Dave gave a very good explanation as far as the volunteer role versus the board role, the board oversight role versus a volunteer who is working to help support the organization. There's such a range of opportunities at nonprofits, from more of a frontline volunteering opportunity that you might think about with, tutoring kids or handing out water at walks, that kind of thing, to more of a strategic perspective. There are opportunities to serve. Many nonprofits have committees. David was talking earlier about the finance committee. There are a lot of strategic planning committees, and often nonprofits are interested in getting community members involved. It doesn't just have to be board members. And then, of course, you have the board level role, which is absolutely a legal responsibility, and there's a fiduciary responsibility associated with that. The board members are responsible for making sure that the organization is successful, is following its mission, is trust the donations that are coming in, that they're using those in the way that they have been entrusted to use those. And that the organization is acting legally and ethically. So it is a higher level of responsibility. As far as getting involved, I think you could certainly start out as a frontline volunteer, but it's not necessary that that's how you start off. I think the best thing to think about is, what do you want to do? Some people, after a long day in large strategic roles, would rather do something where you don't have a lot of responsibility in that area, and maybe would want to do something that's, mentoring a youth, or, something, handing out food at a soup kitchen. That can be more what you're looking for. But if you want to use skills that you have from your day job that are strategic, they certainly are skills that nonprofits appreciate having. And you can go right to a board role. Depending on the organization, some nonprofits prefer, you want to make sure it's a good fit both for you and for the nonprofit. So some do want you to get involved first at a level, usually a committee level, to essentially make sure that you're going to follow through on what you say you're going to do, and that the organization is an organization that you care about, and you want to make sure that you like what the work is that's being done, that you feel connected to it, that you feel good about the leadership. So it really depends, but there are a lot of different ways to get involved.
Yeah, and I know there's some organizations will even have an advisory board, or what I call board light, that you can dip your toes in the water and see if it's for you. And sometimes people who are rolling off of boards when their term limits have come up will go onto the advisory board, so you don't lose the expertise and the involvement of those wonderful people. I notice that some questions are starting to pop up, and one question that was on our list dovetails with a question from Allie, and even a little bit from Jane. So I'm going to try to merge a few questions that I think are related. And I was going to target this one to you, David, which is, how did you find your way to this organization, the Boys and Girls Club? What have you learned? Were your original expectations met, exceeded? And Allie's question was, how did you know the board was right for you? Know that the board was a right fit for you, sorry. And Jane asked about, how do we find out about board opportunities that are out there, so that if we're looking to get involved, how do you start the process of finding an organization if you're not naturally connected to one already? So, David, I'll let you start with that.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks very much. So as I mentioned, I'm about to get involved in a second board, and my sort of entry into the two is different. So I'll describe both. With respect to the Boys and Girls Clubs, I got into a point in my life where I had a little bit more capacity to give back to the community. So I looked at the things that I'm passionate about. And so for me, social justice, education, youth development is one of the things that I'm very passionate about. And I tried to find organizations that do that, because if I'm going to be spending a lot of time and energy, it should be around something that I care about. For some people, it could be the environment, or it could be animals, or it could be the arts, or what have you. So there's a lot of different things. So think about what the organization does. In this case, I actually had a connection. Allison actually had a connection to somebody who was on the board of the Boys and Girls Club at that point in time. So just like with Beacon, doing networking, figuring out who's involved with that organization, where you can find out more about them. And so I had a chance to sit down with one of the board members at the time, understand how the organization runs, what it's like to sit on the board, et cetera. And then we approached Dave, and we made that match. So my entry into Boys and Girls Clubs was directly onto the board. With the other organization that I'm starting to get involved with, it was through a volunteer opportunity. That organization needed some help with sort of pro bono HR consulting. And so I connected with them around that. We did some work together, me as a volunteer, offering my expertise and services, and they eventually asked me whether I would consider joining their board. I think in any case, it's really important to understand how the board operates. So not just how the organization operates and what they do, but how does the board operate? What is it like to participate with this group of people? How is it a big board? Is it a small board? Is it a lot of roll up your sleeves work, like Allison was talking about with some of the other organizations? Are you going to be asked to do grant writing or things of that sort? Or is it really oversight? And how often does the board meet? All of those things. So just make sure that you do your homework, I guess, is the thing. And just as with any kind of commitment that you make, you're going to understand or feel whether the fit is right or not. And if it's not right, look for something else, because there are, all sorts of nonprofits operate differently, and all sorts of boards operate differently. So there will be ones that fit and ones that don't fit. In the case of the Boys and Girls Clubs, we also have a national organization. And so there are all sorts of resources that are available to the club and to the board that come from Boys and Girls Clubs of America. Our training on how to do fundraising as board members comes from Boys and Girls Clubs of America. If you go to ActorsNet, where Allison's on the board, there's nothing like that, right? So also think about that. For me, it was a good first experience on a board, to be on a board that had a national organization and be on a board that was well established and already running well, so that I could learn. Now I'm joining an organization where the board isn't quite as sophisticated, and I'll be able then to add value to that board through my experience that I'm bringing. So I don't know if I answered all of the facets of your question, but probably have spoken long enough and let somebody else have a turn.
Allison, maybe you can speak about if somebody's looking to identify a board opportunity and are not really sure where to start, any suggestions or ideas?
I know I'm not supposed to advertise, but you're free to call me and I can help you think about it. And it doesn't cost any money. We actually offer a training where we train people how to serve on nonprofit boards. And at the end of that, we do a meet and greet program where we do like speed dating, essentially, so that people can try out different nonprofits and meet with them and see what's a good fit. But that's just one way. And I know I'm based in Princeton, but I know that there are programs like that in Philadelphia as well. I think another way to go is if there's an organization you already know a little bit about and have an interest in, there's no reason why you can't reach out to the executive director and just introduce yourself and say you'd like to get more involved in the organization and see where it goes from there. It may not immediately be a board opportunity, but it would be a good way to explore to see what that relationship could turn into. And certainly I know nonprofits, we really value our donors. So if you're somebody who is already donated to an organization that, we would like to hear how you would like to get more involved. So I think that would be something that would be a great opportunity. If you have colleagues who are already involved in nonprofits that sound like they're of interest to you, that's another way to go to try to build bridges. But I do think you can reach out to a local nonprofit and say that you care about that work that they're doing. You'd like to learn more about them and how you can get involved, and that is a way that could start to build some bridges. Maybe get involved on a committee.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I'd add to that. Many chambers of commerce have nonprofit subgroups. So that would be a way. In New Jersey, there's an organization called the Center for Nonprofits. So you could look for the organizations in your geography, whether that's Delaware, Philadelphia, whatever, that provide resources to nonprofits and advocate on behalf of the nonprofit sector. They would, you can take a look at their membership. So there are all sorts of different ways that you could find out about which nonprofits are operating in your area.
Sure. And I know in Pennsylvania, there's PANO, which is the Pennsylvania Association of Nonprofit Organizations. In Delaware has DANA, which is equivalent. Beacon, nonprofit subgroup. We have nonprofits. Somebody's interested. Perhaps, you come and you reach out to the nonprofit subgroup. Me, we'll, we're always aware of board opportunities and potentially looking for board members. And then the internet's a great place to just do research, whether you use GuideStar or I'm blanking on the other website, the Charity Navigator that ranks Charity Navigator, which ranks websites, ranks nonprofits. So yeah, Allison, go ahead.
Just to add to that, if you're interested more in the project level, just getting involved with nonprofits, starting off not at the board level, there is an online service called Catch a Fire that may be of interest as well, that matches up people from across the country with nonprofits to do projects. And there's also Volunteer Match, which tends to be more of frontline traditional volunteering that you think about. So that's another resource as well.
Jory, I'm going to combine, I'm watching the question roll, some really good questions coming in, but I'm going to combine, there's two development related questions that I think that the panel could address. One is about how you move a working board into a fundraising board. One of the perennial questions that people in our business talk about all the time. And the other was from AJ asking about how give get, a give get requirement, particularly in today's economic atmosphere compares to a get, how much is give get really the way people are going versus give? Okay. So those two development questions.
Yeah, why don't we start with Dave on that question?
So, It is a multifaceted answer. It's also a long-term project. It's not a light switch, unfortunately. I think it starts with strategic planning. Why do you need fundraising? What's the cause and effect of your ability to do that, to move the organization and impact the community? Because most fundraising is around passion. And I would also say that about board service. Meaning you have to find out what you're passionate about and then look at nonprofits that affect that area. And those are the best board members. They're also the best fundraisers. Most people don't like to fundraise, but when they realize it's really you're asking people to help something about you care about and that they care about, it's so much easier. And it's so much easier when you can articulate it to impact and strategic planning. So that would be the first step, I would say. The next is a lot around your recruitment process. So we're very upfront when we recruit new board members and talk to them about what the Boys and Girls Club is about. We also say, what is our current strategic plan goals and how that relates to board roles and how that relates to fundraising. We do have a give, get, and earn, which is fairly high. It's between $20,000 and $60,000 a year for each board member. We talk to board members about how they could do that. We have a whole menu, and we value as much the earn, which is time. So you could be a chair, not be able to write a big check or get a big check, but you could chair an auction, you can chair a golf outing event, and put in the time that enables us to earn those dollars. And so we go through that whole process with board members as part of the recruitment process. Now, we didn't start at 20 and 60. I think when I came on board, we were like at 5 and 10. And that was a big process for us to do that at that 5 and 10 to orientate new board members and then bring current board members up to that level. And it helps when you have board members that then also lead by example in doing that. Once you find that some board members get on board and do that, other board members will then either say, yes, I will do that as well, or no, I can't, and I'll step up off the board. And that there'll be some transition doing that. Same as when you say we're doing a capital campaign, you know you're going to lose about 20 to 30% of your board members because they're just not ready to do that. But it's the best thing for the organization based on the strategic plan.
Thank you. And I know a couple of the things I've seen happening in terms of trying to help boards step up in fundraising. There are consultants who will run board retreats and with a specific focus on developing your board. There's some great books out there. The classic Gerald Panis has written Fundraising Habits of Successful Boards and a few other books. And so there are resources and tools, but I think, as Dave pointed out, it's a process. It's not an easy thing to accomplish. Was there a second part of that question, Janine? The current environment.
Current environment, and kind of give versus get, which I think David addressed really.
To. Allison, you wanted to say something?
Yes, please. First I want to just say that David is an extremely effective fundraiser. So please take everything he just said to heart. And it is interesting right now with the organization ActorsNet, we are not great at fundraising, and it's something that as a new board member, I'm trying to help the organization move. So I appreciate what Dave just said. I'm going to remember some of what he said, but it is definitely a challenge, and I do definitely think it has to do with bringing new people on the board who are bought into that perspective. I wanted to address the give or get question because this is something that is being discussed a lot in the nonprofit world right now. And it's part of a larger conversation about equity. So there is really a recognition now that nonprofit boards, when you look at them, are primarily made up of, frankly, white people who tend to be older, and many of the services that they're offering or nonprofits offer serve a population that is not an older white population. And so there's this feeling that we need to look at making sure that the voices of the people who are actually getting served come to the board. So there is now more and more, I think, organizations are looking at how to do that effectively. And there is this stressor, this dichotomy of looking at, as Dave said, if you want to bring in revenue, which you need to survive as an organization, but you want to open up your organization, and part of the whole thing with equity is many of our colleagues who are people of color don't have the same contacts or financial access to bring in, but are very valuable as far as the voices that they have to offer. That this can be a challenge. So there are a number of organizations that, instead of having a give or get, talk about that you should give an amount that is significant to you. And that, it's on the one hand, it's wonderful because then it means that you can open it up to people who may not normally be able to access the board, but you're always, as a nonprofit, thinking about, but how am I going to make it to that bottom line that we need to make to survive and continue to provide services? So I think there's this tension that exists, but to answer the question earlier, I think more and more we're going to not be seeing give or get. But I don't know, Dave may have a different perspective on that.
So the way we've addressed that, one is we're growing the size of our board. And we emphasize for middle managers and also to build our diversity on our board, the earn piece, the time commitment. We do also talk with people about the ability to make a gift that's significant to you, both for all of our board members based on their personal gift, because everybody's in a different personal situation. And so we do have some of our board members that have a lower fundraising goal. And I think if everyone is committed to giving time, because obviously you're serving on a board because you want to serve. And if you're not going to give or get, time is why you're serving on the board. I think we can find a way for every board member to have a financial impact on our organization. And I think that's the big thing. Again, when you're coming to a board, it's passion and you're making some type of commitment, either financially or time. And as long as you can do that, then you'll be a great board member and we'll figure out a way to make it work for everybody.
I would just add to that, I've worked for organizations where that exact mentality is in place, which is not every board, you want to have board members who are representative of the community that you serve to the extent that that's possible. So your expectations of giving have to be adjusted to accommodate that. But what I've learned is that when you talk to a board member about making a gift that's significant or meaningful to you, you can also tack on to that, we want to be in your top 3 organizations that you support. You make the assumption that they may be supporting other organizations. If you're sitting on our board, you need to give to this organization as though we're in your top 3. And I noticed my friend Joe Tumalo is joining us today, and he's sort of a planned giving expert. And another way to talk to people is planned gifts are ways that you can give in the future that don't cost you anything today. And that's a topic for another discussion. But so there are a lot of different ways to do that. But as a fundraiser, I am acutely aware that when I apply for grants, a lot of the grantors want to know that 100% of your board is giving something. So there has to be an expectation that even if it's $10, $100, $500, that you're going to make some kind of gift each and every year that you're serving on the board, whatever is meaningful and reasonable for you to do. I know we've had some other questions coming in, and a few people want to know about term limits and what are sort of the average term limits or typical term limits for board members. Does anybody want to take this?
Can I just insert, Jory, there's sort of 2 questions that go together. One is about term limits and one is sort of the average size of a board.
Yeah.
So kind of go together.
Yeah. Anybody want to take a stab at that?
I can. Yeah, I don't want to take up all the time. But I can tell you that I do know that the average size of a board is 15 people. But that's an average size. And it really just depends on your organization, how big your board needs to be. You need to assess that for yourself. It's not that 15 is the perfect size, it's just the average.
And I think term limits are all over the map, from no term limits to 3 years, 5-year terms. David, did you want to add?
Yeah, well, I'll add a little bit to the size piece and then term limits as well. So at the Boys and Girls Clubs, as Dave mentioned, we're trying to grow the size of our board. Since I've been there, we've been in the high teens or around 20. We're now at 23, 24. And we're finding that as we get that big, it gets progressively harder to keep everybody involved. So if you are going to have a board, if you're going to be a board member, you need to be involved, right? That's what we've been talking about. If the board is really big, it's hard to make that happen. So we're actually in the process of relooking at our governance and creating more of a tiered system in terms of amount of involvement. My experience with the Boys and Girls Clubs is we've had a pretty effective board at the upper teens. And there are always a few people who are not as involved. And then there's a few people who are heavily involved. I think you find that with any organization. In terms of term limits, with the Boys and Girls Clubs, we do not have term limits, and having exposure to other Boys and Girls Clubs from across the country, that's pretty typical. And in some cases, there are board members that have been board members for 10 or 20 or even more years. In our case, we had a sort of a sea change in terms of our board after we opened a second clubhouse. So we now have 2 clubhouses in Mercer County, and the second one opened about 4 or 5 years ago. And a lot of board members that were long-term board members stuck it out until the new clubhouse opened. It was sort of their swan song or legacy or what have you. And since that time, a number of those board members have rotated off, and we've brought new board members in. So we actually have a board that, even though we don't have term limits, the majority of the people have been there less than I have, and I've been there 6 years. There's only a handful that have been there longer than me. So there are ways of managing, I guess, without term limits. I think the most important part is to continue to refresh, get new thoughts and ideas and energy, continue to put your arms around the board members who roll off, because they've always cared about your organization. So stay connected with them in some manner. They can be donors over the long term or involved in an advisory capacity or something. So find mechanisms to keep it fresh and to grow the number of people who feel strongly about your organization over time.
Great.
And
I'm
quickly
notice.
add that I think most nonprofits need board members, and that's why a lot of them don't have term limits. And I think term limits, a lot of times people implement them because they're afraid of having a hard conversation with an inactive board member. And it's easier to say, oh, this guy's been on our board too long. Let's have term limits. And then we don't have to have the conversation with this person why they're inactive. And I think if you're a good board, you have those conversations with board members each year about how they're doing. And if someone is inactive, have that conversation with them, because then they're got to either step up or step off, and you created a better board by doing that.
And Dave and I talk about that in terms of the relationship between the board chair and the CEO. On a regular basis, we talk about how are the board members doing? Are there any of us that are sort of in that category? And then, during my term, we've had that conversation with several of our board members, and a couple of them have stepped off.
Great. And the conversation has started to move towards recruiting for boards. There's a few questions coming up in the chat. We had some questions prepared. What do you look for in recruiting new board members? How do you find or identify the right prospective board member? What does your recruiting process look like? And then Richard added to that question, different types of expertise that you might be looking for on the board. Maybe it's finance, HR, law, and then Michael McGuire asked about, is COVID-19 during this time of, sort of being sequestered away, is that forcing us to sort of change how we look at our interactions with respect to recruiting and onboarding and involvement of board members? So I'll throw that out there. Who would like to take a stab at that?
Go ahead. You start, Dave.
All right. So a lot of our recruitment it is done in 2 different ways. One is through our board governance committee. That committee is a little bit more formalized, meaning that's where we look at areas of expertise that we would need to bring on our board. It's where we look at diversity on our board, and tenure and mix on our board. So that's a lot there, and that's where we then identify specific areas that we'd like to try to go out and recruit from. A lot of our other work is done just through our interaction. And I think that's the most challenging thing with the COVID-19, since you're not interacting with people. And that's like interacting with donors, interacting people at special events. A lot of people say they hate special events. They're a lot of work and not a lot of money. but that's also where we recruit most of our potential committee members and board members from those interactions. So you really get your best board members from people that are already or involved in your organization, because you already know they have a passion for what you're doing. And then it's easier just to talk about them becoming a board member. We usually start that process through a board member or myself asking somebody if they're interested in learning about leadership opportunities. We have a board recruitment packet that we send to every board member that then's a follow-up in-person meeting. And at that in-person meeting, we talk about what the board is currently working on, what are some of their challenges that they're working on. We talk about the board plan for the Give, Get, and Earn and how that is developed. We talk about the various committees. We also talk about, hey, if the board service isn't something where you want to start at, here are other opportunities. Then if that person has an interest in taking the next step, we then connect them to our board chair or one of our board development, our board governance chair, to have the conversation board member to potential board member of what it's like to serve on our board. And then if everybody's ready to take the next steps, then that's when we nominate someone for our board.
So just to speak to what Dave just said, so I think the ideal way from a nonprofit's perspective to think about who they need to bring on their board is really to start with strategic planning and to see what their future holds. And then from there, many nonprofits use a board matrix, which is basically formalizing what Dave just talked about, identifying areas that you would like to enhance as far as your board, whether it be skills or demographics. Some organizations, the geographic location that people are in is important, and you want to have a diverse representation for that, as well as skills and other demographic information. So it's interesting, the question about COVID. So as an organization that provides training for potential board members and then matches them, that was a question that I had, what's going to happen? We do this training that's usually in person, and then we match people in person. And we had just completed a class. And so we have this group of people waiting to be matched with nonprofits. And I thought, well, no one's going to want to deal with us right now. No one's going to be interested. But we put it out to our nonprofit community, and there are a number of nonprofits that are still definitely looking to bring people on. And we've also had a lot of interested people who, I think, as was said at the very beginning, want to make a difference right now. So I'm really excited, because I do think that this is a time that there is this opportunity for a fit. I mean, it's definitely more difficult, as Dave said, because we're not doing it in person, which is how I've always done the recruiting as well. But there is an opportunity to match people. And I do think there are going to be new skill sets that are going to be looked for. I know something that David Howe is always very focused on is bringing in HR people to nonprofit boards. And I think that's going to be increasingly important, given all the decisions that are going to need to be made around recovery and how to manage employees remotely and how to make sure they stay safe. And that's not something nonprofits tend to have a lot of strength in, is HR support. So, and I'm sure there are other areas as well.
I'll just
I would add that. Oh, I'm sorry, Dave. Go ahead, David.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I can be brief. I'll just add to that my experience in working with Dave Anderson and the team at the Boys and Girls Club, I think there are two of us on the board that are HR executives, and I think we've had an opportunity to really work with them on bolstering the people management practices and how we develop people and so forth. I think in addition to the COVID specific issues, which are very acute and very difficult to deal with, there's an opportunity to think strategically about the growth of the organization, and do we have the right people with the right skills, and what's the right way to attract the kinds of people that we're going to need for the future. So I am passionate about HR involvement. I think that, you know, most boards have finance people on them. Most boards, or many boards, have lawyers on them, which are very, very important. HR is an area that I think is underrepresented. I'd love to help more HR people find their way to the boards because I think they can be particularly helpful to the nonprofits.
I would agree with that. And I know at my last organization, having a lawyer who's a partner in a major law firm was hugely significant because we were able to obtain pro bono legal services from one of the best law firms in the area by virtue of our board. And there are law firms that are willing to do that, but having a connection, someone on your board, really facilitates that. Aaron Dunkel mentioned that there's an organization called VolunteerHub.com, VolunteerHub.com, that also has volunteer opportunities. So that is another resource for those of you that are looking to identify nonprofits. And I think that the point about diversity should not be underscored, especially with what we're witnessing today. And many organizations are serving underserved communities where we're, I think Allison made the point earlier, if you have a board that consists of white people, is that really best serving the community served? Does anybody, before we move on to a different topic, and I know we're getting a little short on time, I'm not sure how long we're going to go before we open it up, but does anybody have any other thoughts on recruiting, specifically recruiting members for the board, members of diverse constituencies, or just recruiting in general in terms of how you go about recruiting new board members?
Well, I think for diversity of any type, whether it be looking for people of color, people from different age groups is another, area that is a focus right now. We have all these millennials with skills that are certainly different. My children remind me every day from the skills that we have and are definitely valuable. So just the idea of trying to recruit people who are different from the people who are currently on the board, it takes intentionality. It takes assessing that you want to bring somebody with that skill set or that background on the board, that person on the board, and then making an effort to try to find them. I know when I go to meetings, I really try to reach out to people who look different from me or have a different background from me and try to get them involved in what we're doing. It looks like, I know that that's something that every organization can use, that opportunity to try to bring new and different people on, because of course there are so many studies saying that even in the corporate world about when you have a diverse team, you're much more effective and your results are much more effective. So I guess my big recommendation would be just to be intentional about it, to decide in your mind that's what you want to do, and then every opportunity you have to make that impact, do that.
And it's also critical that they feel included when they come, so that the board members and the leadership of the board needs to actively reach out and involve them, make sure that if they've got different points of view, whoever it is, whether it's a young person or a person of color, whatever it is, that they feel valued and are actually listened to.
And then the last point I'd also make is that you can also look at all levels of your volunteering from your boards. And if you're doing strategic planning, how do you involve a larger group of people in that process? Yeah. Because a lot of it is also relationship building. And as you let people know that they're welcome and you build relationships, it's much easier then to identify those people that you want to bring onto your board.
Great. I know some people probably only allotted an hour, so I think what we'll do is we'll ask one kind of closing question, and I think we covered just about everybody's. Tricia did ask a question about being philanthropic in nature, but does being part of a board also help make business connections? And I think we could generically say yes. It's not the primary motivation necessarily for joining a board. But absolutely, there are opportunities to make business connections. There are events and various ways to bring in your business connections to benefit the organization and also meet new business connections. I think that's a yes. So the last question I want to ask the panel is, there are a lot of serious responsibilities associated with board service. What does the organization owe to the board members? Let's talk a little bit about that, and how do you keep it fun in light of the serious nature of serving on a board? Dave, do you want to take a stab at that?
I think we owe our board just about everything, just as we owe our staff about everything. I tell people I'm a band leader, and if I don't have great people in my band, I'm worthless. And for me, my band is my board, my volunteers, and my staff. So we owe them everything. Fun is really not me.
Come on, Dave.
My staff and my board can say that. I think the best thing I get and the best way is through fellowship. I developed some really great relationship with my current board members, my past board members that I consider my friends. Probably my biggest circle of friends is my fellow board members, my past board members, my staff, and my donors. And I tell people all the time, that's the best reason that I love going to work is not only what we do, but the people we do it with. And I think that's the biggest thing we need to celebrate the most. And that's also the hardest thing with the COVID thing is that you're kind of separated from that.
I'd like to add to that. If you're going to join a board, don't just sit on the board. Like, get involved in what the organization does. So for the Boys and Girls Clubs, I've mentored 2 of the teens through our Youth of the Year program. So those interactions and working directly with the youth that we serve, that's just one example, but getting involved in seeing what we do. We've got a garden, people can get involved in our garden project, or people can get involved in the sports league or what have you. That's the really meaningful. It's not what the organization owes me. It's what the organization offers me in my view. And with Allison, she's getting involved in play reading, and that's something she loves to do. So now she's got an outlet for her love of theater. So think about it that way, that this opens up, you've got a specific role to play, and you're going to go to some meetings and you're going to make decisions, but get into whatever that organization does. And that's the important part about getting involved with an organization that does things that you really like to do.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, there are a few boards we all maybe have heard about that are prestige boards. I won't name names, but when you're joining a board, it's to really get involved and to give, and then through giving you get. And I think that most of these organizations, these nonprofits, that's what they can promise, is that you'll receive benefits intrinsically and otherwise by being involved.
I think I would insert, I think that what Trish was bringing up with her question was that, there are a lot of reasons why somebody gets involved in a board, and wanting to give and be part of a positive impact in community is one of them. But I think what she was alluding to is also, social contacts, business contacts, your own network. Those are all, I think, valid reasons as well, as long as you also have the, wanting to give part, and that, that is something that an organization can offer its board members.
As well as developing skills that you might not have developed elsewhere.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There is one additional thing I think that the organization owes its board members, and that's to take us seriously, or whatever, to listen to us, to, there's nothing, the difference between sitting at a board meeting and providing a point of view or asking a difficult question and feeling that the staff are taking that seriously versus just kind of answering it on the surface and they're going to go do their own thing anyway. That's a big difference. So I think the organizations owe the board members the respect of really taking their input seriously. And I do agree that the connections that you can make through this are really good. I'll just give an anecdotal example. I just recently took early retirement from Merck. I'm now pivoting a bit. And one of the board members of the Boys and Girls Clubs has gotten me in touch with some people that she knows that are aligned with the direction I want to go. So it's part of, they're part of my network, just like Beacon is part of my network and other groups. And you do meet people that you'd never get a chance to interact with through this.
Thanks for including the plug for Beacon.
You bet.
Thanks for including the Beacon plug, David.
Yeah, you got it. I'm preaching to the choir, I think, but doesn't hurt to remind people.
A little bit. We have a few guests on the call. I see my friend Allie. I think Allie is a potential future member of Beacon. So I know a few people have had to jump off, but a lot of people are still with us, and I'd like to open it up to questions from the attendees. If you've got a question burning on your mind, unmute yourself and feel free to jump in.
Or a perspective that hasn't been shared yet.
Or a perspective to share, yes.
Yeah, Jory, I would like to also respond to the question about joining a board to make business connections. I mean, that clearly will happen. You can make great personal friends out of it, but I would say that is not a reason to just join a board. You really have to be enthusiastic and interested and want to help in whatever way you can and believe in mission and all the other things that have been commented on today. Yes, a natural result, if you get on a board and you stay there, you're going to make connections. You're going to meet people, just like with Beacon. But I just wouldn't put that at the top or anywhere near the top of the list as a reason to look to go on to nonprofit boards.
Thanks, Lou.
Tricia, if I can just chime in. My initial, I wrestled, I posed the question pretty quickly. I was really trying to communicate this is not the primary reason that I'd be interested in joining a nonprofit. In fact, I'm trying to get involved with some now, but it would be a natural byproduct. So maybe I positioned the question incorrectly. I don't want anybody to walk away thinking I'm a money grabber, So anyway, thanks.
You're safe here, Tricia. No worries.
I have a question to the panel, and I've experienced this myself. If you're a board member, you believe passionately in the cause, but you don't necessarily agree with the board leadership direction they're going. That must happen a lot, I imagine. How do you deal with that without wanting to just give it up?
Dave,
Who wants to answer that?
So I think there are a bunch of ways to do that. One, I think, is one-off conversations with board leadership about, the direction and what your concerns are. And I think it goes back to David Howe's point that every board member's opinion is very important and has to be considered. Questioning, providing information to the CEO about, why you're concerned about that particular thing and see if they can come back with the reasons why they can overcome your concern or why their direction is more important. Ultimately, that if it is a major different direction, you may then have to look for a different organization. I know one organization specifically, they were trying to decide if they should do a capital campaign or not. And that by a slim majority, they decided to move forward, and they lost a significant number of board members because those board members felt very strongly that it was a bad decision for the board and they couldn't move forward without that. So that would be my suggestion how I would go about if it was me or someone in on my board. I would want to talk it through to see if we could get on the same page, because ultimately not all decisions are going to be unanimous. You just have to have everybody unanimously follow the direction moving forward.
I was going to actually echo that, Dave. Serving on the Beacon board, when we're interviewed on the way in, we're asked a very similar question as part of the interview process. If you disagree, but the majority or the majority decision is to move in a particular direction, how would you respond? And the idea being that a board has to be unified, But at the same time, that diversity of thought, diversity of opinions is really important to a board. You want to have those discussions, and whether it's as a board as a whole or one-on-one, a board member always has the option to resign if he or she chooses to. But the board has to pull together in the same direction ultimately for it to be a strong and successful board, I think. Does anybody else have questions or
I just want
perspectives?
to add one thing to that, or two things. One is you can join a board to try to shape the direction that the organization is going as well. If it may not be, one direction's right, one direction's wrong, but as you join a board, you have the opportunity to modify, to shift, to suggest, to offer additional ideas. And it's not the job of the board to agree to everything, right? Diversity of thought and debate is constructive as long as it's done the right way. The other point that I would make is one of the things that we do at the Boys and Girls Clubs, because we have a slightly larger board, is on important decisions, we involve a subset of the board members in the thinking process. So if we do a strategic plan, or we just had a review of what our plans are for summer camp in COVID, we offered board members, hey, come be part of the conversation. And if you're passionate about it, if you have strong points of view, show up. That's an opportunity to have conversations and voice opinions in a smaller setting. You don't have to do everything in big board meetings.
I had a question, Jory. I think David, you just answered it, but we talk about bringing diversity onto a board, which is very important. And diversity could be a bunch of things. It could be color of skin, it could be diversity of thought, age, demographics, all of that. But we all better be prepared when we do bring in a diverse person into the board that's different than us or different than the people on the board, because it's difficult. It's not as easy as, oh, we just bring these people in. You can lose board members. You can have arguments, and you want to be fair to the person you're bringing in. So just a thought. And has anyone on the panel or anyone in the call experienced that and have any good tips for that?
So that's a specific topic that I address in our board orientation process. So after someone's nominated for the board, we have about a 90-minute board orientation process. And that's one of the key things that we address with all new board members is that, hey, you're now a new member of a group. That changes the group dynamics. Please ask questions because first off, there's probably 4 or 5 other board members that have been on the board for 2 or 3 years that probably have the same question but are afraid to ask because they've been on the board for 2 or 5 years. And the other is that we value your opinion. We don't want people at a board meeting not to have a conversation. That's why we have a board meeting. And so we encourage people to have that conversation.
So can I jump in for a sec, Jory?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm a big fan of and proponent of diverse boards and just diverse life. And I also, as a nonprofit consultant, I am passionate about board education. I just wanted to say thank you to David, Dave, and Allison. I thought you guys did a great job. But working in social justice organizations, as I have in the past, and I just want to reference a wonderful article called "For Our White Friends Desiring to Be Allies," that given the fact that it's true that most boards are still white and represent individuals with white privilege, I think part of what we are going to see in the future in terms of board education is not only, it's just going to be a whole group, it's just going to be a whole education component about how the language that you want to be using with each other. And it runs the gamut. I mean, that's a whole conversation unto itself, but white-splaining as mansplaining, you just have to evolutionarily move your board into a place where diverse board members are not only welcome, it's more than just welcoming. It's really how do we speak to one another and then understand the same language of each other, and then come to the amalgamation of like what does this diverse board really want to accomplish. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get preachy.
No, in fact, I think
Just my thoughts there.
some of us would love to have the link to that article, Lynn, if you
I
want to share
will.
it.
I'll send it to you. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else have a question or perspective to share? Okay. Last call. All right, Janine, I'll turn it back over to you to wrap it up.
Thank you, everybody. This was terrific. I'm excited to get this nonprofit subgroup going again, and I encourage you to watch this space. I'm actually going to send a survey out to the whole Beacon list to try to get a sense of what kinds of topics people want to hear from this group. But this was a great start, and we will keep going. And when we are able to, we would like to get some service opportunities for Beacon members going, and we're tabling that for a little while because we can't all show up together and do things. But I think we will try to get that going, as well as some more panels like this. Very useful. One of the reasons I was motivated to get this group going is that I've been in Beacon for just about a year. And as I got to know Beacon, I realized that there were a lot of people working in or interested in working in as a staff member or volunteer or board member, and a lot of interest in this group. So in getting this group going again. So stay tuned, stay involved. Let us know if you have any thoughts or want to participate in the future. And thank you for joining us this morning.
Yeah, thanks for joining.
Great way to start the day, and as I said at the beginning, a very timely time.
Beacon is the premier executive networking organization serving the Mid-Atlantic region. To learn more, go to beaconforlife.org.